Okay, well, hi everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. For those of you, we are going LinkedIn Live as well as Facebook Live on my account, our She Summit community. And for those of you who aren't familiar with me, I'm Claudia Chan. And we're also recording this for my How We Rise Leadership podcast that will air later on. But we're doing something different today. Our ninth annual She Summit conference is coming up next week. It starts Monday, November 9th through Friday, November 13th. And it's our ninth annual conference, Advancing She, He, and Equity. That's what SHE stands for. It's a leadership conference. And I'm so honored that Carly Fiorina, who is for those of you who don't know Carly, she runs her Carly Fiorina Enterprises and has a whole leadership company that helps advance leaders inside organizations, as well as Unlocking Potential, a nonprofit that teaches leadership. She is a former presidential candidate, as well as the former CEO of HP. And it's just such an honor to have her join the conference next week. But we are doing something different today, which is we decided, in our meet and greet coffee conversation, although I'm drinking water today, not coffee, that we would actually just invite the public to our conversation, to meeting each other and just having the next 30 minutes sharing conversation around leadership today and better leadership. And I know the world is in a crazy place. We're gonna avoid politics as much as we can, but just want to say thank you, Carly, for how are you doing today? How are you feeling?
Well, first of all, Claudia, it's great to be with you. Thanks so much for the opportunity to have this conversation in public, so to speak, with everyone this afternoon. I'm doing fine. I think all of us maybe had not enough sleep and maybe a little too much coffee and maybe a little too much wine last night. But, if I could just tell a really short story right at the outset here, I actually got very, very focused on developing leaders and stood up my foundation, Unlocking Potential, which is focused on developing leaders in the nonprofit sector specifically after the 2016 election. And I bring that up because what the 2016 election said to me is that politics is pretty dysfunctional and we can't look to politicians to solve all our problems, and Washington, D.C. creates problems as often as it solves problems. And here we are in 2020, and I think all that is still true. Whatever side of the aisle you're on, whoever you voted for, I think we can predict kind of more division and dysfunction in Washington, which means problems are going to get solved because we decide that we can lead. And so that's really why I got focused on this. So I'm delighted that we can have a conversation today about leadership, because never has leadership mattered more. And we need as many leaders as we can get because we've got a lot of problems. That's
right. Yeah, I love what you just mentioned. And I think it's so relevant, and so much of what She Summit and I wrote a book called This Is How We Rise. And I know you have a book coming out soon, which I want to talk about. But it's all about, how the word leadership and just the term leadership was really not initially created for all people, right? Like business structures and institutions and companies and governments, in many ways, structures historically were designed for, men, and also a breadwinning male and a child-rearing female. And I think just, oftentimes your average person can just think the word leader and think that you have to have a big title, or it's, somebody who holds a major position. And so what we've been, a big part of our work at our organization has been about teaching that, leadership means leading from where you are, and leadership also needs to be whole life integrated. We talk a lot about whole life leadership, and that's what I just generally sense right now is I know the world is there's so much anxiety and uncertainty and stress, but we need to not forget that leadership starts with us, and not one person or one party should limit us. And how do we continue to focus on what we can control and our personal leadership? And you talk a lot about that as well.
Well, Claudia, it's such an important point you just made, because I think, first of all, you're absolutely right. For a lot of people, leaders are supposed to look a certain way, sadly. Or leadership means position, title, power, money. And what I found out in my life, and what you know, is that leadership actually is about none of those things. Leaders don't look a certain way. Leaders look always. And while sometimes leaders have position and title, it's not the position or the title that makes them a leader. Look, I started out as a secretary. I was a nobody going nowhere. And what I've learned in the course of my life is that leaders solve problems. Leadership has nothing to do with position and title. It's different than management. Leaders change the order of things for the better. They solve problems, which means they always challenge the way things are. And most importantly, anyone is capable of leadership, regardless of what they look like, regardless of their circumstances, regardless of whether they have a position or title or not. And here's another little secret. Women are natural problem solvers. So women actually are natural leaders, although we don't always get that message. And here's the other little secret, that we are all better leaders when we're working with people who challenge us, which means people that are different from us. Right. And I know you believe all of those things, and that's what the She Summit is all about.
Yeah. And I think that, so a lot of the organizations and the people that we engage with, and we're very much focused on corporate America, because we believe that companies are micro societies of humanity. And for so long, we've seen especially women and underrepresented groups leave the corporate workplace because they're just sick of it, or it's not sustainable anymore. And I think it used to be that 40% of women would leave the workplace after they had children. And now with COVID, 865,000 women left the workforce in September alone, over 2 million this year. And all of my friends, and I think that our community is very much those like mid to senior level, or some rising stars as well, where it's just, it gets so hard to maintain and stay in. And I think, so moving into, and you ran HP, and I know diversity inclusion in corporate America was sort of different back then versus, what it is today. And, but, how does, what would be your advice to these women who are struggling, like what they're carrying inside, to stay in, just given everything that is happening? Because I do feel like for them to actually stay in, and for companies to prevent flight risks, we need to give permission for an employee to be honest and to be authentic and to really share what they're struggling with. And I know many times employees are afraid to do that. And at the same time, companies are trying to become more inclusive and diverse, but it's almost like there's a gap there that is not happening. So just any thoughts around that?
So yes, many thoughts, because you've touched on many important subjects. First of all, you said something really interesting. You said, I know back in the day, diversity, equity, inclusion were something different. And actually they're not. Really? They weren't, if it was the real stuff. So when I arrived at Hewlett Packard, we were one of these companies that thought we were doing pretty good. And then we actually looked at the numbers and we weren't doing well at all. Women and people of color were leaving the workforce. And so we set about, in a very systematic way, building a diverse senior team. Let's just start with that. Mm. And, I can share lots of very particular how-tos, but here's what I start with. So often, people are put into positions because someone else knows them. Someone else is comfortable with them. Someone else is not challenged by them. Someone else feels like they're less of a risk because I know this person. In other words, people end up putting people like them in positions because it feels safer and more comfortable, when the truth is, if we focus truly only on merit, you get a diverse team. Now you have to work really hard to do that. That's point one. Point two, We were dealing just as a point of fact, we were dealing in Hewlett Packard with the issues around our transgender employees long before it was an item in the media. And what I know is that people are at their best when they can bring all of who they are to the table. People perform at their best. They fulfill their potential when they can truly be who they are. And so if you are a company, a leader who wants the best from your employees, and we all should, because we get the best results when our employees perform at their highest levels, then we have to allow people to be themselves with all that complexity and contradiction, in some cases, other responsibilities like childcare. The third point I'll make is companies are making a tremendous mistake when they say, well, childcare is now a complication in the era of pandemic, so it's okay if all these women leave the workforce. Wow, what a loss. Women are natural problem solvers. Women are natural multitaskers. Women are natural collaborators. And guess what? Those are all fundamentals of leadership. One final point. A neuroscientist will tell you that we are built to be tribal, meaning we're most comfortable with people like ourselves. We will gravitate to people like ourselves because we feel comfortable there. And Lord knows social media and everything else sort of divides us even more into tribes now. But a neuroscientist will also tell you that we only learn, we only grow, we only get better when we are confronted by something new. And generally that something new comes from someone different, a different idea, a different way of looking at a situation. So I think we haven't made enough progress around diversity, equity, and inclusion because people don't understand how fundamental it is to performance. And yet the data is clear. Diverse teams outperform homogeneous teams. Teams with women on them do better than teams without women on them. So if you care about performance, including women, lifting women up is vital to performance.
Yeah, and in terms of, organizations, like if heads of HR or senior managers or leaders or diversity inclusion folks who are listening to this, like in terms of tactically changing that, how do we create cultures and environments where your people can show up and not be afraid to be who they are and to communicate and to voice something? How do we get to that place? Is it, and I so believe in, which is why we live in this sort of learning, training, development area of business. So that's what we, companies will send their teams and D&I champions and to our conferences or bring in some of our programming and leadership programs for their internal people. So I'm a huge proponent of learning and development programs, but how do we tactically implement this change, like allowing people to be who they are?
Well, I think there's, of course, it's not a short or an easy answer, but I think there are three key components to it. Number one, culture needs to be led and role modeled from the top. If you want to change a culture, the top of the house has to sponsor that change. It's just true. And so people with the positions at the top of an organization need to truly understand the linkage between diversity and performance. And it's clear they don't. Even though the data is crystal clear, the data is crystal clear. Every problem gets better when women are engaged. Diverse teams perform at a higher level. Diverse boards perform at a higher level. I mean, the data is crystal clear, but clearly people haven't internalized it, because if they had, they would have done something about it. Corporate America spends $8 billion a year on diversity, equity, and inclusion training, and yet the numbers aren't budging. If anything, to your point, the numbers are going the wrong direction. So clearly people don't believe yet that diversity and performance are inextricably linked. So I think that's a first problem, and it needs to be led from the top down. Secondly, I think culture is about how people behave. So you have to have a culture where when someone brings all of themselves to the table, whatever that means, the problems with their kids, the fact that they don't look or act necessarily the way I do, the behavior that surrounds them has to be, you know what we care most about? We care most about the fact that you can actually fulfill your potential. Because only then will you perform at your highest, and only if you're performing at your highest can we collectively perform at our highest. And then, of course, there's some fundamental tactics and techniques that work better. For example, gender blind resumes tend to work better. Gender and color blind resumes tend to work better. If you will focus a leadership team on articulating the risks they perceive in hiring someone different, they can generally talk themselves through those risks and say, you know what, we can mitigate the risks of hiring someone who seems different, but who will challenge our way of thinking in a very productive way. So, it starts at the meta level of people actually have to believe that there's a linkage between inclusion, diversity, and performance, and the data is crystal clear. Then that change in culture has to be role modeled starting at the top. And then there are techniques and tactics. Where do you look for people? How do you hire people? How do you creatively use flex time? How do you creatively support and resource people? I mean, that's a lot to unpack, but all of those things matter.
And I love the modeling piece and the behavior piece, because day 3 of the summit, my framework of leadership is what I call whole life leadership, but I teach that the first life department of leadership is really your self-care, your mental, physical, and your financial health. Like, we have to individually be healthy, and we can't give what we do not have. Like, we need to be full and we need to be healthy. And so, like, really your number one leadership should be your health. And day 2 is leadership in your family. And I really believe leadership starts in the family. Even our relationships with our spouses, if you're married or in a relationship, to how we and using family members actually as a muscle or as a tool to strengthen those inclusive leadership habits, like being quick to listen before speaking, or how do you be more understanding. And day 3 is how do we also look at our careers, the trajectory of our careers, and lead our careers better and be more purposeful there. And day 4 is workplace. And I really divide and sort of silo out, because I feel like leadership really applies to all these areas of our life. But oftentimes I think people get caught up with, leadership means, again, that accolade or looking a certain way versus modeling and behaving a certain way. And that it's much easier to say something and to say you stand for something than modeling it. And I think that is so big. So speaking of modeling, and I was listening to one of your interviews about like speaking the truth and standing for the truth and be who you are. And I mean, obviously now I'm like trying to avoid politics, but right now, just as an overall theme, we live in a culture today where social media and the tribe that you're plugged into, right? In a way, you become the content you keep, and so much of that almost whoever you are and what you feel. Oftentimes now it's almost scary, and people are afraid to actually be who they are publicly because they're afraid they're going to be criticized. And so it's an interesting time that we're living in, because in a way, like, we need to have these cultures of authenticity and authentic leadership and really be who we are and have the courage to do that. And we're telling organizations about that, to do that. But then it's also really scary to do that, because culture and media today almost prevent us from doing that. Just any thoughts there? And I love what you also said about, and I saw on another post you did, I think, on Instagram, about like loving your enemies and actually purposely surround yourself with people with different views. And because if you're always around the same, then you're never going to learn anything. And how do we have conflict better? How do we disagree better? How do we have the courage to actually really be who we are, even if we know people are going to be against it, but then have healthy conflict and healthy, collaboration around that?
So, a couple thoughts. First, when you were talking about your conference, and I really love the way you've divided it into these days, the analogy that I would use is, and this is especially important for women, because as women, we always feel like everyone else's needs come first and everyone needs something from us. What I would say is, think about those long ago airplane flights we all used to take. And when the safety announcement went on, you would hear the flight attendant say, if an oxygen mask should drop from the compartment above your head, put your own oxygen mask on first before attempting to help others. We have to be, to your point, healthy and breathing before we're going to be effective helping others. The second comment I would make is, yes, leaders need courage. And the reason leaders need courage is because you're going to get criticized. You're going to get criticized no matter what. If you're trying to change the order of things for the better, if you're trying to solve a problem, then you're trying to challenge the way things are. And if you challenge the way things are, you will get criticized. And as you point out, social media means criticism is omnipresent, and it's so personal and it's so nasty. And so a leader has to have the courage to say, what other people say about me does not define me. What defines me is my own behavior, my own choices, my own leadership. And getting that straight, that I am defined by what I do, by what I choose, by the impact I make, not by what everybody else is saying, is huge. And I think is particularly huge for women. The other thing that I would say is around collaboration, and to your point, love your enemy. What I teach in leadership is always that leaders not only have to have courage, but they also have to be humble and empathetic. Because if they are not humble and empathetic, they cannot collaborate with others. And they will not collaborate with people different from themselves. So humility is not about a lack of self-confidence. It's not false modesty. It's not saying, oh, no, I can't possibly do that. Humility, in fact, leaders need self-confidence. You have to know your value. Women in particular, we need to know our value, and we cannot underestimate our ability to impact a situation. But we have to be humble enough to say, you know what? I don't know it all. I'm not perfect. I'm going to make a mistake. I can't do it all by myself. I cannot do it all by myself. And I'm not going to take the credit. I need help. I'm willing to listen to someone else. Empathy is the ability to hear someone else, to value somebody else, even if, or maybe especially if they disagree with us, because it means they see things differently than we do. And wow, I need to understand. I need to understand why you see this way. In my experience, when you get people away from the noise of social media, when you get people away from the vitriol of politics, if you can get people together focused on a common problem, and you say, let's talk about this problem or this goal or this objective, and you can get agreement around the problem or the objective or the goal, then all those differences become sources of innovation and creativity. They're less threatening. And so humility, empathy, let's get to a common problem, let's get to a common goal, but then let's work together to solve it and to make progress. In other words, talking is fine, but let's get about doing something. And when people get focused on doing something, actually making a change, then sometimes that humility and empathy and collaboration are a little easier.
No, that's so powerful. And it's such an oxymoron sometimes too, because it's, let me see if I can get this thought through, is in many ways, just even being inclusive, being a more inclusive leader means, how do I see more if I'm in collaboration or conversation with someone, or partnership or relation with someone, how do I think human nature is to like want to see it from your perspective.
Yeah.
Versus like, wait, let me try to see the world through their eyes. Let me actually like not be the first to like jump in and put out my ideas, but actually let me like step into this relationship in a posture, in a humbled posture of wanting to learn and actually see things more from other people's perspective. Because you have no idea. We make so many judgments and so many assumptions, and we have so many blind spots based on, so many external factors, right? But how do we get to know people, hear their perspectives? And that actually enables diversity. And actually, that's the whole point is, right? Like the unity of the diversity is where the innovation and the collaboration and the disruption comes from. But yet it's just, it's interesting.
Well, one of the things that I like to say a lot, because in my experience, it's proven to be true, is never underestimate the power of a question. And I honestly believe that one of the best places to start that process that you're describing is to ask a question, an open-ended question.
Yeah.
And to ask the question not in a judgmental way, but in a curious way. So let me give you an example. There's a huge difference. Let's say somebody says something. It could be a political thing. It could be a point of view about a problem. Okay, let's just say they say something. And you don't either agree with it initially or you don't understand it initially. There is a world of difference between a question that sounds like, so first of all, you could just start talking. Well, I don't agree with that because, okay, you're not going to learn anymore. But there's a profound difference between saying at that point, well, you don't really believe that, do you? That's a question. But that's not a question that will elicit any more information versus a question that sounds like, wow, I never thought about it that way before. Tell me why you think that. The power of a question. People should spend a lot of time learning how, and by the way, men in particular, if I may say, should spend a lot of time learning how to ask questions in a genuinely curious and open-ended way. Tell me why you feel that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so much energy because immediately you're giving the person permission and space to be heard.
Yeah. Or even help me understand.
Right.
Help me understand.
And I think that's so much of what I'm also just given George Floyd this year and all the racial justice and equity that's been taking place, and around how people feel. People just like healing needs to happen, and people need to even space to be understood, to be seen, and to even like reconcile,
Well, change, to that point, change needs to happen. A long-standing problem we need to make progress so that people can heal, exactly to the point. And none of that will happen. None of that progress will get made. None of that healing will happen unless we can actually see each other, hear each other, and learn from each other.
Yeah, exactly. So can we go 5 more extra minutes? Are you good on time? Because it's 4:30, 4:29.
Whatever you like. Yes, I have 5 minutes.
One last question is,
I'm losing track of time. It's such a fun time.
I know. 30 minutes goes by way too quickly. And I mean, this is also like, I'm going to just put on, if you were my mentor and I had a mentorship, coffee with you, and, I'm 45 years old, been an entrepreneur for 20 years and been building this business for almost 10. And, so I'm an entrepreneur and I've created this She Global, this organization, and, have worked with over 500 organizations. But, there's also just that struggle, right? Of like fighting, like I always say, see the invisible, do the impossible. And I have a very particular vision for what I offer and bring into organizations. And, as a supplier and as an entrepreneur, getting corporations to buy into our programs, it just takes a lot of perseverance and a lot of resilience, right? And I think for anybody out there, whether or not you're an entrepreneur or you're in that role at your organization or you're in transition or you're a stay-at-home parent and you have a dream, but it's just that fight and that, because it's always 10 no's to 1 yes, or 50 no's to 1 yes, or whatever it is, right? The fight. And the courage that, to keep fighting for something that you believe in, that you've been called to. And I mean, you've had such an extraordinary career. Is that something that, that courage, that resilience, that fight inside of you, when it gets really hard, like what would your advice be to all of those us out there, to keep rising and keep, leading for what you believe in?
So I would say first that every life has setbacks and challenges and even tragedies. My life has had all three of those. It's part of life. And so life requires resilience. Absolutely. And success of any kind, however you define success, requires perseverance as well as resilience. It's just part of it. And so, I've been talking about throughout the day the characteristics of leadership. We've talked about courage. We've talked about collaboration, humility, and empathy. You just talked about I call it seeing possibilities. You called it seeing the impossible. But the point is to see something out there that's different and better than where you are. However, resilience, perseverance, all that's about character. And character is an essential quality of leadership. Character is what keeps you going when the going gets tough. And the going always gets tough. It always gets tough. I mean, I say that as someone who's gone from secretary to CEO. I say that as someone who's battled cancer. I say that as someone who's lost a child. I say that as someone who has been criticized brutally, publicly over many, many, many years. You have to have the character to keep going when the going gets tough. However, and I'll close on this, none of us have to do it alone. The advice that I give young people all the time is find the people who lift you up. There are tons of people who will tear you down. There are people who will tear you down just for the fun of it. There are people who will criticize you just because that's what they think the thing to do is. And yet, there are people who will lift you up. Spend your energy on them. Go to the people who lift you up. We all need them. Those are the people who will take a chance on you. Those are the people who will listen to you when you need it the most. Those are the people who will say to you, you know what? You can do this. And you do have potential more than you realize. And I will take a chance on you. Spend your energy on the people who will lift you up and focus your energy on the things that matter to you. Pay no mind to the people who want to tear you down, and don't sweat the small stuff that tears us apart, but in the end isn't going to make any difference at all.
That's right. And we have the power to choose what we want to focus on, right?
That's right. It's one of the most important choices we make.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for tuning in. This will be available on my LinkedIn account, and we'll also share with Carly's team to share it, as well as the How We Rise Leadership podcast, where you can get that episode wherever you download podcast episodes. And Carly will be speaking and sharing a keynote presentation on, and we'll have more conversation at She Summit around how do we lead today and leading from where we are and leading in your career.
I look forward to it.
That's right. Thank you so much, Carly. This was such an honor. And see you next week. Okay.
See you next week. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks.